Vašavsi hipsteri i это типа центр hipster культуры.
First one. Dodgik.
Dodgik.
Dodge.
Dodgik. Okay.
Okay, so the first thing is hello, and how you say it is dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Nailed it.
Nailed.
How do I say lubimая moja?
Moja kochana.
Oh, moja kochana.
Moja kochana.
Привет z Odessy. Greetings from Odessa, Ukraine, on the shores of the Black Sea. And today I'm wearing an appropriate t-shirt. I've got 3 of Ukrainian languages, literally heroes on this one. Ivana Franko, Leslie Ukrainka, and Taras Shevchenko. So in today's video, I'm going to give you an overview of 4 Slavic languages. These are the 4 that I personally have experience in learning. I do have a broader experience with learning languages. I actually have studied and learned to a certain extent more than 10 of them, so I'm definitely in a good position to help you about the tips and tricks for learning these languages better and faster. So I'll be giving you an overview of these 4, which are Polish, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Russian, and how to recognize them, even if you don't speak them at all when you see them written. How similar or different are they from each other? How long should it take you to learn them if you start out on that journey of learning one or several of them? Which ones are going to be the most useful for you to think about learning? You know, where they're spoken, what's the utility of them in your life? And I'll be outlining my own personal journey and experience and why I decided to learn each of these 4 Slavic languages. So from a very sunny Odessa, let's get this video started. Poyekali.
SAR Experience.
So behind me here you have the Odessa Opera House. So opera, you might know, has many performances that are in languages, Romance languages like Italian, or Germanic languages like German. And these 4 languages are part of the Slavic language family. Well, it's a different branch of the Indo-European language family in total, right? So you can have this broader family, which is all these languages that are not mutually intelligible, and then you have the ones that have some degree of mutual intelligibility. So they're in the same branch, more or less, of languages here in Europe. And probably there was a precursor to these 4 languages that's known as Proto-Slavic. It's an earlier version of the Slavic language that we don't have any record of, so we can kind of guess and try to construct what it would have been. But the earliest recorded precursor is Old Church Slavonic. Think of it a bit like Latin, right? The Catholic Church probably still does a lot of things in Latin, and derived from Latin are languages like French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, the basis of them. So Slavic languages are pretty similar in that sense. And just like if you've learned Spanish, you'll be able to understand some Italian and some French and some Portuguese and some Catalan, maybe even some Romanian. Likewise with learning, say, Russian, you're going to understand some Ukrainian. If you learn Polish, you're also going to understand Belarusian to a certain extent. And there are different percentages given to the languages in terms of their mutual comprehensibility or lexical similarity, which is a fancy word for saying that, yeah, how similar the words are in both languages, the roots. So let me give you some stats, as it's gotten a bit windy here towards sunset. It's gotten a little bit windy here in Odessa, but for example, Russian has 38% similarity with Polish and 74% with Belarusian, but only 62% with Ukrainian. So a lot of Russian propagandists that try to claim that Ukrainian is just a dialect of Russian. But you see there's actually a good bit of difference in terms of the vocabulary difference between the 2 languages. Ukrainian, on the other hand, is 84% similarity with Belarusian and 70% with Polish. And I couldn't get a real accurate stat for the similarities between Belarusian and Polish, but it's over 70% as well. So there you can see they are pretty similar, but not the same thing. Like if you take the Romance languages, like you're going to get higher percentages of the lexical similarity between, say, Italian and Spanish Portuguese and Catalan and Spanish and so on and so forth. So actually the Slavic languages are a bit different as a reference point for you if you happen to speak Spanish and have traveled to Italy or France or somewhere else, so you'll understand. So how can you recognize the differences between these languages when you see them written? Well, of the four, only one is written in the Latin alphabet, and that is Polish. Got some Polish behind me here, you can see, so that's pretty easy if you're trying to tell, because that's in the script you're probably most used to. But the other three are written in different variations of the Cyrillic alphabet. Now the first thing is, don't be scared of the Cyrillic alphabet if you haven't learned in these languages before, because actually that's one of the easiest things to learn, because you got to use it all the time. So actually, I don't know, I think I learned in about 10 hours, so it's not a massive investment to learn, and then afterwards it becomes pretty easy. So if you want to know how to recognize the differences between, at first glance, between say Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, well, Belarusian and Ukrainian, they have like a letter I in English that you don't find in Russian. And then the Belarusian language has the unique W, whilst the Ukrainian has the unique Yo, which is here. You can see it on my t-shirt. And also this letter, whilst it exists in the Cyrillic used in Russian, it has a different sound in Ukrainian, which is Y, and this you find at the end of the different verbs, all the verbs in Ukrainian, which you don't see, for example, in Belarusian. So often the vocabulary is very similar between Belarusian and Ukrainian, but when you look at it, you see the verb and it ends in Y, and that is a quick way to recognize the differences between them. And I've spent a lot of time learning languages in my life. It's one of my passions. I've learned over 10 of them, not just these four. So you can tap into my tips and tricks from over, 20 years of learning languages, more or less, and over 10 languages. This is a daunting topic if you've never learned a language, like maybe you're American and you had Spanish typically in high school and you don't remember any of it. Very typical. Also was my experience having learned languages at school. They didn't serve me very well once I got out into the real world and I had to learn them. So basically, to distill it down, there are two main elements. One is motivation. If you're motivated, you will learn it eventually. And the second one is time and being consistent, just learning a little bit every day. And like with Russian, which is the one I started in, I actually had a university class for a semester where I learned the very basics. And after that, went through a lot of the products that were available to help you with your language learning. I've reviewed many of those on my channel, so I'll put a playlist up above, also down below in the description, to get my reaction to a lot of these products. And also, I take private tuition. It's become very easy in the last decade to have your language classes online via Skype or Zoom.
Знаешь, что я, может быть, поеду в Минск?
Когда, Лиза? Будет очень круто.
Я поеду в Минск, потому что мне нужно поехать в посольство.
Ага, окей.
И я думаю, скоро, не знаю, может, через 2 недели.
2 недели? Супер, я еще буду там.
And you log in and you talk to your teacher, and I just focus basically on talking a lot because that's what I need these languages for. I'm not a grammar geek in that sense, or grammar Nazi. I'm not interested in learning all the rules, rote memorization, any of that stuff. I want to use it in a real life situation so I get that practice.
How do I say любимая моя?
Моя кохана.
Oh, моя кохана.
Моя кохана.
And Ukrainian, I actually started learning a good few years ago, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And I was spending a good bit of time in Lviv in the west of Ukraine, where it is important to know some Ukrainian. And I went to a language school there also, Solomia, and I shot many videos there with her. So I'll link those also up above and down below in the description if you're interested in Ukrainian. Belarusian, I actually learned. I went to Minsk one summer and I actually had free tuition for the weeks I was there, and actually gave me a visa, specific visa to come and learn Belarusian. It's back in 2018, so I actually am one of the few foreigners who speaks Belarusian.
Дождик.
Dodgik. Unfortunately, I don't get that many opportunities to practice, but here in Warsaw I actually do, funnily enough. And lastly, we have Polish, which is the newest one that I started learning because now I'm spending a lot of time with clients here in Warsaw, and it is pretty important to speak Polish, even though Poles actually have a very high level of English, but it definitely is very valuable if you're spending time in Poland to build up a social circle, strong social circle, by also speaking Polish. Relying on English might have been the way to do it maybe 10 years ago. Ironically, when the level of English is probably lower. Nowadays, if you want to mix in higher level local circles, then really need to learn decent Polish, in my opinion, in my experience, seeing who's able to integrate in those circles and who's not as a foreigner. So that's my tip for you, is to invest in learning the language. And also I have a free little course down below where you can tap into my wealth of knowledge in terms of learning languages. So go down below, it's for free. It'll give you some of the quick tips and tricks that I learned in over 20 years of learning lots of languages, over 10 of them.
Pozdrawiamy z Polski, dzień dobry. Hello.
So now that you know how to recognize the differences, where are you going to see them? When are you going to use them? Now, Russian is obviously the most widely spoken of these four languages. It's spoken by a little bit under 400 million people, and obviously it's an official language in Russia and also in some other countries that were in the Soviet Union or in the Russian Empire, like it's official in Belarus, in Tajikistan, in Kazakhstan, and in Kyrgyzstan. And in some countries where it's not official, it is widely spoken and understood. Some examples would be Ukraine, especially in the south and the east. Also going to be spoken a lot in Moldova, also up in the Baltic states, in particular in Latvia and Riga, where I was recently, and some other parts of normally the former Soviet Union. Can be an easy lingua franca with the older generations, since they would have probably lived in part through the Soviet period. And also now you're finding large diasporas here in a country like Poland and Warsaw, because so many Ukrainians and Belarusians have fled here that you're actually going to hear quite a lot of Russian, and maybe even see it in the city. Also, actually, you can see behind me here a little bit of Belarusian maybe. I actually just noticed there's a Belarusian youth club or a youth hub. So you can see that written in Polish, but actually over here on the other side, it's written in Belarusian. Actually, maybe I should have pointed that out, since it's kind of a good example about how these languages are becoming a little bit more common. There you see it probably behind me, up on the board there. I'll do a close-up of it in a second. The other three languages, obviously here in Poland, the official language is Polish. Should be about 40 million people who are going to speak it. There's going to be some diasporas like in the US and Chicago, where you probably might be able to use it, or other parts of Europe where Poles tend to congregate. Belarusian, in contrast, since we just have it there on this building, it is spoken by around maybe 4 million people in theory, although my experience with Belarusian is that amongst Belarusians it is not so widely spoken to a high level, like a native level. A lot of them will understand it or have studied it a little bit in school. Reminds me a bit of Irish in Ireland, where I grew up, of course, that it's not spoken fluently by the majority of the population, unfortunately. And then Ukrainian is, of course, spoken primarily in Ukraine. And there's about another 40 million people who speak it. And you're going to have large diasporas because of this Russo-Ukrainian war, where Ukrainian is going to be spoken all over the European Union, and also in other countries like Canada in particular, where there's a massive, absolutely enormous Ukrainian diaspora historically. I've also been to a few other places across the globe where Ukrainian is spoken. Like I once went to southern Brazil, and there is a town, yes, there is a town in southern Brazil where there are a large number of locals who still speak Ukrainian. They came over 130 years ago.
Ми тут говоримо українською мовою, що ми її навчились від наших батьків, які приїхали з Галичини, з австрійської Галичини до Бразилії. І ми тут дуже добре почуваємося.
Interestingly, in that part of Brazil, Prudentópolis, they tended to marry people from the same church, and they have a minority church called the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And that one was the one that they all tended to marry each other, met at church historically. That's the way it was explained to me, and therefore they tended to marry other native Ukrainian speakers and kept the language alive there. So quite interesting. And you also, nearby, you had a Polish town that I went to briefly. I just stopped in, and there actually the locals spoke Polish. So you have some isolated communities across the globe. Same with Russian in that region. Belarusian, I don't know if there's anywhere outside of Belarus that speaks Belarusian, other than there's actually a few villages in Poland. But anyways, that's a little bit esoteric, I would say. So there you go. There's where you're going to have the opportunities, more or less, to speak these languages and recognize the differences between them.
Деньги или любовь?
Так, нет, такие вопросы нельзя задавать.
Ой, to trudne pytanie.
Узаєма
Uzayema,
або мовлення.
abumone. It's too fucking hard.
So I've just finished up a weekend with a client here in Warsaw. And it's interesting also on the linguistic front, because this particular client, his parents are actually native Russian speakers. And whilst he was born in the US, he does speak fluent Russian because he was used to speaking it at home. And that came in ironically very handy, even though obviously people here in Poland speak Polish, because there are significant Ukrainian and Belarusian diasporas here, and in their restaurants, cafes, Russian is widely spoken. So actually he met a lot of girls who spoke Russian on this trip. And he's a guy who's actually moved here to Poland, got his Polish residency, sees it as a long-term prospect for him. And of course, he is investing in learning Polish because, well, if you're going to live here in Poland for long term, it is a game changer to learn the local language. Now, that isn't normally the case for guys from the West to come here to Poland in particular. I see a lot of guys saying online, oh, everybody speaks English, no need to learn Polish. But we don't just learn language for communication purposes, we also learn it to enter new social circles and to have more credibility amongst the locals. Если парень только говорит по-английски, или, может быть, он из Италии, то итальянский и английский язык, будет удобно тебе, или ты думаешь, что будет очень много энергии говорить с ним, будет лучше, если он не знает русский?
Для меня будет неудобно, потому что я его не знаю английский.
Ага. Но ты была, может быть, на встрече с парнем, который не говорил по-русски или по-английски?
Да, ну было. Ну, типа, именно не была в отношениях, а именно пересекались, именно была встреча. То было немножечко некомфортно, потому что я не все понимала, что он говорит.
Вот. И Google Translate переводчик не помогал?
Нет, там он так переводит, что лучше не переводить.
Лучше не переводить.
Да,
Окей, интересно, да. What I've seen with my clients, especially the one I'm actually going to go up and see in Riga next, in Latvia. He's actually learned Russian from scratch in the last 2 odd years, Paul. You speak pretty good Russian. We'll say it's probably a B2 level. How useful did you find it here in Riga to speak Russian as opposed to just using English?
Russian I found was invaluable to use here and just to open, and I think that one thing I would just say is that you get that level of credibility with the local people. If you're conversing in the local language, I still think people are a bit wary of Brits here. That could be just the fact that we don't have the greatest reputations in Europe for partying and whatever else. So it's unquestionably people are a lot more receptive to you speaking the local language. And the interesting thing is, in some of the bars we've been hanging out, some of the waitresses and waiters have got to know us. These guys all speak English really well, but they see us conversing in Russian with various people, and they choose to speak with us in Russian, even though they're just as capable to speak to us in English. So people are naturally gravitating to the languages of their choice, despite their level of English. So it's invaluable, I would say. It's an absolute must.
It is, for him, in his own words, a game changer because it just gives him so much extra ability to communicate with the locals. It's not everyone speaks great English everywhere you go, and nor are they really keen to speak it. It also gets you out of the tourist box if you can speak the local language, because being a tourist isn't seen as a great thing in many parts of East Europe because of the history of sex tourism to the region. So if you're a foreign guy and you actually can speak the local language, you automatically get kudos for that. And yeah, even better, I guess, if you speak Latvian in Latvia, it can be even extra special. But in Riga, maybe about half the city can speak Russian. So you get treated, at least by that half the city, as a bit of a local if you learn Russian to a good level. Now, with the Russo-Ukrainian war, I have not been going, unfortunately, with clients to Ukraine. Hopefully that will change in the next year or so. Nor have I been going, obviously, to Russia or to Belarus. But I have been bringing my clients to live the Czar experience, which is your first step to having a new life here in Eastern Europe. Help guys who normally want to stay longer than a few weeks. 3 to 12 months is what I recommend, time-wise, in your city. And I've been bringing them to Chisinau in Moldova, crazy Chisinau. Also to Almaty, the Almighty, in Kazakhstan. Absolutely fantastic place. Got the mountains, you've got the lakes, you've got the canyons. It's a pretty incredible place, especially in summer when it's really green. Also got skiing in the winter. As I mentioned, been going to Riga in Latvia, pretty mad place as well, I have to say, for partying. And here, obviously, Warsaw in Poland. So there are 4 places that I've been living the Czar experience with my clients with over the last year or so with the Russo-Ukrainian war, as I mentioned. Now, it is not open to everybody. It's by application only. Down below in the description, you can find an application form, fill it out, and it could be you with me. Avoiding all the tourist traps and mid-label those tourists, because that is one of the big problems that foreign guys have when they come here. I'll give you an example. A guy came up to me, because I have a YouTube channel, I often get recognized in these cities that I tend to film in by foreigners, not so much by locals, because my channel's in English. And one British guy from London came up to me actually on the Friday night, and he was looking for, I guess, some free advice. He took his, took his shot in that way. And he was talking about how he gets very little positive reaction from the ladies this year in Warsaw compared to last year. And he was wondering if there's a place he could go to that has less Western tourists coming or digital nomads. This guy could work online, increasingly popular. And I said, yeah, you could head up to Riga maybe. Not so many there because it's more expensive, but you're going to face ultimately the same problem. You don't speak the local language. He didn't seem interested in investing any time in doing so either. So you need to create a local social circle that's a certain value. These are the things that are going to add to your experience. Otherwise, you end up like Billy No Mates. Local girls are probably in general not going to be so interested in you, especially the ones who are more beautiful because they have a lot of options. You know, high value guys who are considered locals or live locally. So these are the things that you want to, avoid kind of the tourist experience, which is basically what he was having, and have a more high-level local-like experience. Anyways, down below is the application form. And before you do that, there are 2 very important playlists that you should look at. I'm going to put them up on cards above, also down below in the description. First one is the cities that I lived the Czar experience on, some previous cities also there. And the second one is my series of tutorials for dating the 9s and 10s in Eastern Europe. Lots of very valuable tips there. And as Wayne Gretzky said, he's a famous Canuck ice hockey player of Eastern European origins, Belarusian, Ukrainian, and Polish, so very representative of the direction and the location of my videos. He said that
you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Down below is the application form, and on that note, because I got some steps in front of me, so I didn't want to walk with my big camera here and maybe trip up, I'll bid you a very pleasant evening and see you in the next video. Do widzenia from Warsaw, Poland.
Czar Experience.